Chapter 1. My phone was pressed to my ear. Lin Jianhua's voice sharp and unnegotiable over the line. Gee, Jennings pregnant. She's been suffering severe morning sickness these first 3 months. The tiny 2-bedroom apartment she lives in Xinju has poor lighting on low floors, and she can't sleep well at night. That large Seaview flat you own in Qianhai's all yours alone anyway, it's just sitting empty wasting space. Pack up your belongings these 2 days and move back to your old studio apartment. Clear the big flat out for her and her husband to rest through the pregnancy. That's settled, you hear me? I stood in my 160 square meter living room, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the Shenzhen Bay nightscape. Cargo ship lights flickered on the water, and the distant city skyline blazed unnaturally bright. Dad, I sold that Qianhai flat last month. Every sound on the line cut off instantly. The chatter and laughter between Zhao Hongmei and Jenning in the background vanished completely. Silence stretched for 6 long seconds before my father's voice boomed back, several octaves higher. Sold? Who gave you permission to sell it? It's a property registered solely under my name, fully paid for out of my own earnings, I replied flatly. All transaction paperwork is legal and fully executed. The final payment hit my bank account last week, and I've reallocated the capital to other assets. You've lost your mind. His ragged, heavy breathing crackled through the receiver. Your sister's carrying a baby, counting on that apartment to settle into a peaceful prenatal routine, and you sold it without a single word of advance notice? Do you even consider this family at all? I bought that flat with every cent I earned myself. I don't care who earned the money. This is family business. How dare you make such a huge decision on your own? The phone slammed down hard, releasing a steady dial tone in my ear. I flipped the phone screen down on the coffee table, neon city light glinting across dark floor tiles like rippling water. This was my family. Or more accurately, the new family my father had rebuilt in Chengdu after my mother passed away. My name is Lin Ji, 29 years old, working at a top private equity firm in Shenzhen. My father Lin Jianhua is 57, retired from a mid-level management post at a state-owned enterprise last year. My stepsister Lin Jianing is 25, married to Meng Hao Jian for just 1 year. Jianing is not my father's biological daughter. She was brought into the household by my stepmother Zhao Hongmei from her previous marriage and took the Lin surname after moving in at age 7. I was 9 when my birth mother Su Yunxiu passed away from illness. 2 years later, Zhao Hongmei moved in with Jianing, and the entire family's focus shifted overnight. For decades, my father repeated the same line to me in the exact same tone. Ji, you're the older sister, you must yield to your younger sister in everything. So I yielded. I gave up my bedroom, surrendered my monthly allowance, skipped vacation trips to let her go alone, and watched Dad spend every weekend driving Jenning to piano lessons without ever asking about my exam scores. Last year, the old family house where Mom and Dad had lived together was slated for demolition. Once the compensation package was finalized, the total payout hit $560,000. I was traveling for a cross-border due diligence project between Shenzhen and Hong Kong, swamped with back-to-back work for 2 weeks straight when Dad called me out of the blue, his voice unnervingly gentle, telling me there was major family news and I needed to fly back to Chengdu at once. I'd hoped he'd finally acknowledge that the house held precious memories of my mother too. But when I rushed home after requesting leave, I pushed open the front door to find the signed demolition agreement spread across the coffee table. Zhao Hongmei, Jenning, and Meng Hao Jian sat on the sofa munching fruit, laughing warmly together. Dad glanced up from the paperwork and spoke as if delivering a formal note is irrelevant to me. Total compensation plus relocation bonus comes to $560K. Jenning and Hao Jian want a bigger wedding apartment. We've locked in a unit at Jinlan Mansion with front row park views, perfect for the kids' future schooling. This full payout covers the flat outright. $560,000, every cent handed straight to Jenning without a single consultation with me. I stood frozen in the entryway, suitcase handle still clutched in my grip. A white ceiling lamp stretched my shadow long and thin across the tile floor. All right then, that's nice, I said quietly, setting down the tea and skincare gifts I'd brought them before flying straight back to Shenzhen that same night. Chapter 2. After the $560K demolition money incident, only brief holiday text messages passed between my father and me. He never called, and I never reached out either. I buried myself in work in Shenzhen, climbing from analyst to investment manager and finally investment director over 6 years. My bank balance grew month by month. I purchased a full-paid apartment and cleared all mortgage debt, then began diversifying my personal asset portfolio. That Seaview flat in Qianhai was bought 3 years prior with my own lump sum payment, registered exclusively under my name. Dad didn't even know I owned such a high-end property until Jenning fell pregnant last month. Zhao Hongmei caught wind of the luxury unit somehow and relayed the news to him, and that sudden, unreasonable phone call was the result. He'd taken it for granted that my personal assets could be seized and handed to Jenny at any moment, just as he'd expected me to sacrifice everything for her over the past 20 years. I stared at my reflection on the dark phone screen, calm and unshaken. Selling the flat hadn't been an impulsive choice. A month earlier, I'd restructured my assets and offloaded the high-value property at its market peak, shifting the capital into more stable investment vehicles. It was a fully independent financial decision requiring no one's approval. But in that moment, I realized this choice laid bare the unchanging logic Dad had clung to for 2 decades. I existed only as a tool, useful when he needed something for Jenning, disposable otherwise. My phone vibrated with a WeChat voice note from Jenning. I tapped to play, listening to her familiar coquettish tone. Sis, Dad just got off the phone with you, didn't he? Don't be mad at him, he's just awkward with words. I've been really unwell with morning sickness lately and wanted a quiet place to rest. If your flat's free. I didn't reply, flipped the phone face down, and stood to pour myself a glass of water. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the endless stream of vehicles on Shenzhen Bay Bridge, the city's harsh white light flooding every corner of the cold living room. I scrolled through my contacts until I found Feng Mingyuan, my university classmate now practicing family and property dispute law in Shenzhen. I'd consulted him about vague, lingering questions the previous month, thoughts buried deep like stones sunk underwater with no motivation to dig them up, until that phone call muddied everything and dragged the truth to the surface. I sent him a message. Mingyuan, can we meet this week to go over the property inheritance recovery matter we discussed before? I also want to ask about the legal process to validate my legal share of my mother's estate when no formal asset division was completed upon her passing. I set my phone aside and leaned back against the sofa, closing my eyes. Certain long overdue truths needed to be unearthed at last. Chapter 3. Feng Mingyuan called me first thing the next morning. I'd barely exchanged 10 sentences with Meng Haoqian in total. We'd met once at their wedding, where he toasted me with a polite, sis. Sis Ji, it's Haoqian, his tone stiff with forced politeness. Dad might not have explained things clearly yesterday. Jennings' first trimester is brutal, and Shenzhen's hospitals and residential conditions are far superior to Chengdu's. We only plan to stay a few months until her morning sickness fades, not move in permanently. I've already sold the flat. A beat of stunned silence came through the line, his pitch rising slightly. Sold for real? Dad said it's huge and barely used. The title has officially transferred to the new buyer. Quiet hung on the line for 2 seconds. I could picture him exchanging silent glances with the others on his end before his tone turned faintly resentful. Sis, with all due respect, Jennings your sister, she's carrying a baby and struggling physically, and you won't even lend her an apartment for a few months? First of all, she is not my biological sister. Second, the flat is mine and I've already sold it. I owe no one an explanation for my own property. You? I'm heading to work if there's nothing else to discuss. I hung up before he could retort. Less than 30 minutes later, a wall of text flooded my WeChat from Zhao Hulmei. Gee, I know you're swamped with work and hate to bother you, but your father stayed up all night with sky-high blood pressure readings. Jennings been crying non-stop, convinced you look down on our family. I won't ask why you sold the flat, that's your private business, but we've missed so many chances to grow close over the years. Jennings admired you her whole life, even if she never says it out loud. Your dad's terrible at expressing affection, but he's always thought about you. We are all one family, don't let petty disagreements drive us apart. I read the entire paragraph without responding. Every line followed her well-worn manipulation script, weaponize Dad's health, leverage Jennings' tears, and hide behind the phrase, we're family, to block all my counter-arguments. I locked the phone screen, grabbed my bag, and headed out. The elevator ride brought another incoming call from my paternal Aunt Lin Zhenying, which I ignored. Stepping outside the apartment building, I breathed in the hot, salty sea breeze of early Shenzhen morning. On my commute, I texted Feng Mingyuan, are you free this afternoon? I'll treat you to lunch at noon. He replied instantly, no court hearings this afternoon. Let's meet at the Hunan restaurant in Xinan at 12. Sounds good. Chapter 4. Feng Mingyuan arrived 5 minutes early, seated by the window sipping tea. He lifted a hand to greet me as I walked in, slender build, wire-rimmed glasses, shirt buttoned all the way up to the collar, looking just like a school teacher. Before our dishes arrived, I laid out the full story, the 560k demolition payout handed entirely to Jennings, Dad's demand for my Seaview flat, and my decision to sell it outright. Feng set his chopsticks down and met my gaze. Do you intend to recover a portion of that demolition compensation? I want the full truth uncovered, I told him. That old house was jointly owned by Dad and my birth mother. When Mom passed away, there was no will or official asset split filed. Legally, half of that property belongs to her estate, which should be jointly inherited by me and my father. Are your maternal grandparents still living? They passed away long before my mother did. Feng tapped his fingertips against the tabletop. Legally speaking, you inherit half of your mother's 50% share of the house, meaning you hold a minimum quarter stake in the entire property, entitling you to roughly 140k of the 560k payout. But there's a critical complication. The statute of limitations for inheritance disputes is 3 years, counted from the moment you learn your rights have been infringed upon. Your mother died nearly 20 years ago. If they argue the statute expired, the court may dismiss your claim. However, he paused briefly. If you can prove you only recently discovered your unclaimed inheritance after the demolition took place last year, the 3-year window starts from the demolition date, which falls well within the legal timeframe. It's only been less than 12 months. What evidence do I need to gather? First, official documentation confirming your mother had no will or posthumous asset division records. Second, original property deeds and proof of her financial contributions to the home purchase. Third, complete demolition compensation statements and full records tracking where the payout funds were transferred. He sipped his tea slowly. The third piece of evidence is the most critical. You need proof that the full compensation, including your legal inheritance portion, was transferred to a third party, Jennings, without your consent. I visited the city archives to pull public demolition disclosures, I said. There's a $30K early relocation bonus listed that Dad never once mentioned to me. Fang raised an eyebrow. Interesting. Any other discrepancies? The auxiliary structure valuation is drastically lower than the renovation costs Mom invested back then. The assessment was finalized 8 months before demolition, when only Dad and Jiahong Mei were living in the home. Do you suspect they manipulated the appraisal figures? I can't confirm yet, but I plan to dig deeper. Fang leaned back in his chair. I can help you file a formal lawsuit if you choose, but the process will be long and ugly. Are you fully prepared to push this matter to court? I don't plan to sue immediately, I just want to uncover the full truth behind all hidden assets first. Chapter 5. I spent every evening that week sorting through documentation per Fang's checklist, Mom's death certificate, old household registration book, original home purchase contract, and property ownership change records. Most physical paperwork required an in-person trip back to Chengdu, but one key lead I could follow while still in Shenzhen, my mother's former work archive. Su Yunxiu had worked at Chengdu Architectural Design Institute before her passing. I remembered endless overtime shifts and stacks of blue blueprint scrolls cluttering her desk from childhood visits. After her death, I'd never asked about her workplace benefits, too young at the time and living far away in later years, but Fang reminded me that institutional housing subsidies and employee housing fund records would prove her financial contributions to our old family home. I retrieved Mom's old household registry copy and dialed the institute's HR office. They informed me the unit had undergone restructuring, and all legacy employee archives were transferred to the district municipal archives for storage. I booked a Friday evening flight back to Chengdu without alerting any family members. I visited the archives office first thing Saturday morning, submitting my ID, kinship proof, and Mom's death certificate to complete the retrieval paperwork. Staff told me to return the following Wednesday to collect the archived files. I booked a single night's hotel room overlooking the Funan River's illuminated waterfront. At 9 that night, Jennings sent another WeChat message. Sis, have you been swamped with work lately? I've sent several messages you haven't replied to. I don't even care that much about the flat anymore, but Dad keeps talking about missing you. Come back to Chengdu sometime, I'll cook soup for you. Her standard script, feigned softness and vulnerability to manipulate sympathy. I typed a single 2-word reply, maybe later, then locked my phone and watched the faint river glow outside my window, a thin crack cutting through the city darkness. Chapter 6. I returned to the archives office Wednesday morning to collect a stack of yellowed, officially stamped copied records, settling into a nearby cafe to page through them one by one. The files listed Su Yunxiu's employment history, hired 1987 as assistant architect, promoted mid-level engineer 1993, senior engineer 1996. A 1994 staff collective housing purchase roster bore her name, with full payment receipts and institutional housing subsidy records attached. This collective housing unit was a separate property from the 3-bedroom old house that had been demolished last year, an apartment Mom had purchased entirely through her work benefits, one I'd never known existed. I photographed every page and encrypted the images before sending them to Fang Mingyuan. He called me 10 minutes later, voice sharp with urgency. This is game-changing evidence. That collective flat is legally your mother's sole personal asset, fully inheritable by you and your father upon her passing. The critical question is where this property stands now. Was it sold, demolished, or secretly transferred without your knowledge? I'll track down the full address to research its current ownership and zoning status. Fang added a warning. If your father transferred or sold this flat without your consent in past years, this constitutes an authorized disposal of shared inherited property, which carries strong legal weight. Start verifying the property's transaction history immediately. I stared at Mom's neat, elegant signature dated March 12, 1994, scrawled at the bottom of the payment slip. She'd written it when I was only 2 years old, never imagining decades later her daughter would trace her long-hidden assets across archive paperwork in a strange cafe. I'll follow every lead to find out what happened to this apartment. Chapter 7. 3 days after flying back to Shenzhen, Dad called me unexpectedly. I'd assumed he'd still be furious over the flat sale, ready to berate me again, but his tone was oddly calm. Gee, I spoke too harshly the other day, please don't hold it against me. I said nothing in response. Forget the flat matter for Jennings' sake, she's dropped the request entirely. I wanted to talk about something else, your paternal aunt's 60th birthday banquet next month. It's been years since you've come home, take time off to attend, and we can bury all past conflicts over a family meal. All right, I'll book a flight to attend. His tone softened with visible relief as he hung up. Something felt deeply off. Lin Jianhua had never been one to back down or offer an olive branch unprompted. This sudden peace offering reeked of Jiahong Mei's typical manipulation tactics. Shortly after the call, Fang's message popped up on my screen. I've tracked the collective housing address to Jinjiang East Street. Records show ownership transferred to your father via inheritance formalities in 2005. 2005, the year I turned 13, 4 years after Mom's passing. No one had ever informed me of this transfer. Fang continued explaining the legal loophole. At the time you were a minor, your father served as your legal guardian, theoretically authorized to sign off on inheritance waivers on your behalf, but guardians are legally prohibited from taking actions that harm a minor's property interests. There's major legal doubt over the validity of that 2005 ownership transfer. Chapter 8. The aunt's birthday banquet was scheduled for the 15th of next month. I booked my flight while continuing to dig up full property transaction trails per Fang's guidance. Archive records confirmed the Jinjiang Collective flat was slated for urban renewal reconstruction in 2018, with a cash-only demolition settlement finalized early 2019, paying out a separate $160,000 compensation sum entirely unknown to me. Combined with the original $560K from our family 3-bedroom home, Dad had controlled a total of $720K in demolition funds split across 2 separate properties. I can file court motions to subpoena the full bank transfer records once we initiate formal proceedings, then explained, but we first need to obtain a copy of the 2005 inheritance notarization paperwork to confirm whether your signature was authentic or forged during the ownership transfer. I noted the Jinjiang Notary Public Office as my next stop upon returning to Chengdu for the banquet, then reached out to Auntie, my mother's former closest co-worker from the Design Institute, whose contact info I dug up from old archives. We exchanged warm small talk before I asked about the 1994 collective housing unit. A long pause stretched over the line before her voice turned heavy with sorrow. Your mother mentioned that flat to me before she fell ill. She said it was set aside solely for your college tuition funds, and planned to draft a formal written statement to that effect, but she passed away suddenly before finalizing the document. I wanted to reach out to you years ago, but your father blocked all contact. I thanked her for the vital clue and jotted down the name of Mom's best friend Zhu Fang, who had kept Mom's confidential written documents stored for safekeeping. I resolved to track Zhu Fang down as soon as possible to retrieve the critical evidence. Chapter 9. I arrived in Chengdu a day before the banquet, booking a hotel 3 blocks away from the old family house instead of staying with them. Fang's final reminder echoed in my mind: avoid emotional outbursts at the celebration, retrieve notary records first before confronting anyone about the inheritance fraud. The banquet venue private room seated 2 full tables of relatives, Aunt Lin's household, my father's family, Zhao Hongmei, Jianing, and Meng Haoqian, plus distant cousins. I pushed open the door, every conversation in the room grinding to a halt at my entrance. Zhao Hongmei rushed to greet me with a plastic smile, Jian waving shyly with her slightly rounded pregnant belly. Dad nodded stiffly from the main table seat, and my aunt pulled me down beside her, fretting over how thin I'd grown from overworking. Mid-meal, after several rounds of wine, Zhao Hongmei smoothly steered the conversation toward me, her tone honeyed with hidden pressure, the conflict over the flat's water under the bridge now that you're home with family. Jianing's for months pregnant, and we're planning a 4-month baby banquet. You'll have to prepare a generous red envelope as the baby's maternal aunt, right? Laughter rippled through the table as relatives chimed in to agree. Jian lowered her head in manufactured embarrassment, Meng Haoqian watching me with a smug, expectant expression. I set my teacup down gently, cutting through the noise. I will prepare a suitable gift for the baby banquet, but I have a question for Dad while everyone's gathered here today. Silence crashed over the room instantly. All eyes locked onto me as I continued speaking clearly. The collective housing flat Mom purchased through her institute back in 1994 on Jinjiang East Street was demolished in 2019 for a $160K payout. Where did that compensation money go? Dad's chopsticks froze suspended above his rice bowl, his face draining of all color. Zhao Hongmei's practiced grin vanished entirely, and Jian ducked her head to avoid my gaze. No one dared speak for several long seconds. Chapter 10. Dad's voice rose sharply, tight with suppressed rage. Where did you dig up this information? Who told you to dig into old irrelevant property records? I only researched my mother's legal estate assets, all sourced from public municipal archive documents. Your mother's been dead 20 years, what inheritance could possibly still matter? I maintained that flat's utility bills and repairs single-handedly all those years, and signed all demolition paperwork alone. What right do you have to question this? Legally, half that apartment belonged to Mom's estate upon her passing, jointly inheritable by you and me. You acted as my 13-year-old guardian to sign a full inheritance waiver transferring the entire property solely to your name. You had no legal authority to dispose of my half-share without my knowledge or consent. The dining room air turned thick with tension. Aunt Lin stared on in shock, her teacup suspended mid-air, while Meng sat frozen beside a tearful Jian. Zhao Hongmei launched into her standard victimized speech. How can you dredge up decades-old family assets and air dirty laundry in front of all our relatives? Your father raised and supported you your entire childhood. Are you really going to drag him through legal proceedings over old housing money? I'm not arguing over petty sums. I'm only seeking factual transparency about assets Mom left for me, I replied calmly. That $160K payout plus the quarter share of the original $560K demolition home both belong partially to me, and you transferred all funds to Jianing without my prior consent. Dad's face flushed dark crimson, his Adam's apple bobbing painfully before he admitted the ugly truth in a hoarse whisper, that $160K demolition check was given to Jianing as her wedding dowry. Aunt Lin gasped aloud, stunned by the revelation. I stood up from the table, grabbing my jacket off the chair back, ready to leave the chaotic banquet room as the entire family stared at me in shock. Dad shot to his feet, shouting, "What exactly do you plan to do about this?" I glanced back at him, unshaken. I will verify the authenticity of the 2005 inheritance waiver signature at the notary office. If the paperwork was forged or illegally executed without my consent, I will pursue full legal restitution for all stolen inheritance funds. Jian burst into dramatic sobs across the table, screaming, "Sis, do you have to tear our whole family apart over money?" I ignored her cries and stepped out into the hotel corridor, where Aunt Lin hurried to catch up with me, a trembling secret spilling from her lips. Before your mother passed away, she drafted a written property statement and entrusted it to her closest friend Zhu Feng for safekeeping, with instructions to hand it to you only if your father concealed her estate assets from you. Chapter 11. I turned back to face my aunt as she stood shaking beside the banquet door. She sank into a nearby chair, recounting Mom's final month of life. Gravely ill yet fully lucid, she'd entrusted the handwritten asset declaration to Ju Feng with explicit instructions for the future, convinced her husband would prioritize his new family over his daughter's birthright. Dad had lied to Aunt Lin back in 2005, claiming he'd settled all inheritance matters fairly, and she blindly believed him until the banquet's shocking revelation. "I owe your mother an apology for staying silent all these years," she whispered brokenly. I exited the restaurant and booked an immediate call to Ju Feng, the friend Mom had trusted with her final written statement, arranging a trip to Beijing to retrieve the original document. Later that night, Jen sent another soft, pleading WeChat message begging me to reconcile and drop all asset inquiries, which I ignored entirely. Every layer of deception Dad and my stepfamily had constructed over 2 decades was steadily unraveling before my eyes. Chapter 12. Less than 10 minutes after leaving the banquet hall, Meng Haoqian called me in a panic, rambling about how unaware they'd been the dowry money originated from my mother's hidden estate. I cut through his excuses plainly, stating I had no obligation to compromise my legal claims for the sake of their household finances before hanging up and reaching out to Ju Feng in Beijing. Her voice cracked with emotion the second I identified myself as Xu Yunqia's daughter, confirming she'd guarded Mom's confidential written document for 20 years per her dying wish, waiting for the day I uncovered the truth and reached out to her for proof. I booked an early morning flight to Beijing the very next day to collect the original handwritten statement from her home. Chapter 13. Ju Feng lived in an aging Chaoyang district residential complex, her apartment tidy despite worn corridor wall plaster. She broke down crying the instant she saw my face, remarking how closely I resembled my mother's youthful features. She pulled a rusted metal lockbox fitted with dual old keys down from her closet shelf, opening it to reveal 3 irreplaceable documents Mom had left behind 20 years prior. A 2-page handwritten asset declaration in Xu Yunqia's neat fountain pen script, formally stating the Jinjian Collective Housing Unit was her sole personal property, to be fully inherited by her daughter Lin Ji upon her passing, with Ju Feng listed as official witness. A bank passbook recording Mom's dedicated college tuition savings fund set aside exclusively for me. Original purchase receipts proving Mom covered 60% of the cost for our original 3-bedroom family home demolished last year. Ju recounted how Mom had feared Dad's easily swayed, people-pleasing personality, worrying Zhao Hongmei's arrival would lead to me losing all her hard-earned assets, so she'd prepared all formal written proof while terminally ill, lacking the energy to complete official notarization. I scanned every document securely and sent digital copies to Feng Minuan for legal analysis before flying back to Shenzhen to prepare formal inheritance recovery proceedings. Chapter 14. After reviewing Mom's handwritten declaration, Feng explained its mixed legal standing. While it did not meet all strict technical requirements for a fully enforceable notarized will, the signed witness statement paired with decades of financial receipts constituted overwhelming supporting evidence proving the Jinjian flat was intended entirely for my sole inheritance. He advised me to first retrieve the 2005 notary archive records in Chengdu to verify whether my minor signature on the inheritance waiver had been forged by Dad to seize the property without my consent. If forgery was confirmed, we could file motions to void the illegal ownership transfer and demand full repayment of the 160k demolition compensation Dad had gifted to Jianing as a dowry. I scheduled a return trip to Chengdu to visit the Jinjiang Notary Public Office and review the archive paperwork in person. Chapter 15. Upon arriving at the notary office with full identity and kinship documentation, I requested access to the 2005 inheritance transfer case file for Xu Yunqia's Jinjiang flat. Staff retrieved the archive folder after a 40-minute wait, revealing a signed Lin Ji waiver statement attached to the notarization paperwork, yet I had never written or authorized that signature at age 13. The notary staff confirmed I could submit an official handwriting forensic analysis application to invalidate the document if the signature proved counterfeit. I filed the formal request on the spot, exiting the office to receive an angry phone call from Dad, who'd somehow been tipped off about my visit to the archives. I informed him I intended to pursue legal action if the waiver was forged, then returned to the old family home at his reluctant request to discuss the matter face-to-face that evening. When I arrived, Zhao Hongmei's brother Zhao Hong, a local district administrative contact they'd brought in to pressure me, sat on the sofa alongside Dad, Jianing, and Meng Haoqian, ready to negotiate a settlement in their favor. I laid out all archived demolition records, Mom's handwritten estate statement and forensic application paperwork on the coffee table, laying bare the full extent of their hidden asset theft. 160k from Mom's exclusive collective flat plus my 140k legal share of the original 3-bedroom home's 560k payout, totaling $300k rightfully owed to me. Dad's face turned ashen as all irrefutable evidence sat between us on the marble tabletop. Chapter 16. Zhao Hong attempted to dismiss the decades-long asset fraud by citing my young age at the time of the transfer, but I cut him off, clarifying he held no blood relation to me and possessed zero standing to weigh in on my mother's estate rights. Dad slowly unfolded Mom's handwritten declaration from the file stack, staring at her familiar script for several long minutes before breaking down and admitting he'd concealed the entire Jinjiang flat demolition payout and illegally forged my signature to seize the property back in 2005 solely to fund Jianing's wedding expenses. As tension reached a breaking point, my paternal aunt stepped forward to reveal she'd known about Mom's entrusted written document all along, having stayed silent out of misplaced trust in Dad's empty promises to split the inheritance fairly once I reached adulthood. After 20 years of buried secrets, the full truth of their systematic asset embezzlement was laid bare for every family member present in the room. I collected my documents and left the house without further argument, receiving a frantic barrage of apologetic, manipulative phone calls and WeChat messages from a distraught Jianing that evening, all of which I ignored. I contacted Zhu Feng once more to thank her for safeguarding my mother's final wishes for 2 long decades, solidifying my plan to move forward with both forensic signature analysis and civil inheritance litigation to recover all stolen funds. Chapter 17. Feng Mingyuan drafted a full legal valuation breakdown tallying my legally entitled compensation, the entire 160k Jinjiang flat demolition payout from Mom's handwritten statement, plus 140k from the original 3-bedroom home shared inheritance stake, for a combined total of $300,000 the family had wrongfully diverted to Jennings' luxury wedding home. He advised me to first attempt a negotiated out-of-court settlement before filing formal civil litigation, giving them a 15-day window to respond to my written demand letter outlining all evidence and financial calculations. Days later, Meng Haoqian's father Meng Dishing reached out to act as a biased middleman attempting to pressure me into dropping all claims for the sake of Jennings' unborn child, which I firmly rejected, stating the inheritance dispute existed solely between myself and my father with no third-party mediators required. I continued gathering supplementary evidence for the upcoming notary forensic test and potential court proceedings, fully prepared to initiate a formal lawsuit if the family refused to offer a reasonable repayment plan within the allotted time frame. Chapter 18. On the 15th day of the settlement deadline, Dad, Jia Hongmei, Jenning, and Meng Haoqian finally contacted me to propose selling Jennings' Jinlan Mansion wedding flat to repay the full 300k sum in monthly installments. I drafted a legally binding repayment agreement via Feng Mingyuan's firm specifying a 30-day full lump sum repayment window, mandatory cooperation with the notary's handwriting forensic investigation, and heavy liquidated damages for any missed payments or evidence tampering attempts. The entire family signed the contract without further pushback, though Jia Hongmei privately coordinated a paid anonymous media smear campaign through a local self-published news outlet in an attempt to damage my professional reputation as a senior private equity director, framing me as a greedy, cruel woman bullying her pregnant stepsister over family money. Feng Mingyuan traced the media payment records back to Meng Haoqian's personal bank account, reserving all defamation evidence as additional leverage for potential secondary legal action if they breached the repayment contract. Chapter 19. The day after I returned to Shenzhen, trouble blew up at my firm. It had nothing to do with my own investment portfolios. Another team was pushing through a consumer goods acquisition deal. The target company's shareholder background was tangled, and the investment committee required me to assist with a cross-reference audit. On paper, this bore no connection to my personal family dispute. Yet during the committee meeting that afternoon, I scanned the target's shareholder register and froze at one name, Meng Dishing, Meng Haoqian's father. He held a 3% stake. The ID number suffix matched the residential records linked to Haoqian's household address without a shadow of a doubt. It was a small world, far smaller than I'd ever imagined. I said nothing and kept the discovery to myself. Back at my workstation after the meeting, I pulled up the target firm's public filings. It was a mid-sized daily chemical maker with an annual revenue of roughly 30 million yuan. Records showed Meng Dishing had bought in 5 years prior via a personal friend's referral. The acquisition bid the firm was fielding carried a steep valuation. If the buyout closed, his 3% share would net him hundreds of thousands in profit. I filed the detail away in my memory, never jotting it down anywhere. That same afternoon, Feng Mingyuan sent over his full legal calculation breakdown, its core conclusions laid out plain. The 1.1 million yuan demolition payout from my mother's staff housing complex belonged to me in full, by her handwritten asset statement and inheritance law provisions. The old 3-bedroom family home's total demolition compensation stood at 3.9 million yuan. My mother had covered 60% of the original purchase cost, granting her a 60% ownership share. Upon her passing, this 60% split equally between my father and me, leaving me entitled to 30% of the total payout, 1.17 million yuan. Combined total owed to me, 2.27 million yuan. Fang added a closing note to the document. These figures represent the minimum legal compensation you are entitled to. Should settlement talks collapse and litigation follow, the court may adjust the final award, but the core ownership framework will remain unchanged. Give the opposing party 15 calendar days to submit a formal repayment plan. I reviewed the paperwork line by line and instructed Feng to mail a full hard copy to my father's Chengdu residential address. The courier delivered it the next evening. That night, my phone flooded with 17 missed calls, 3 from Dad, 5 from Jia Hongmei, 4 from Jenning, 2 from Meng Haoqian, 3 from my paternal aunt. I ignored every single one. Shortly past 1 a.m., Jennings sent a lengthy WeChat paragraph. 2.27 million yuan total. Do you have any idea how our whole family could possibly scrape together that sum? What exactly are you trying to achieve? Are you dead set on driving all of us to ruin? You make millions every year, couldn't you spare 2 million without breaking a sweat? You just want to laugh at our misfortune, don't you? You've hated us all along. Fine, you've won. Are you satisfied now? I read the message once, locked my phone screen, and went to sleep. Chapter 20. 3 days later, my aunt called, and I picked up. Her tone was different from her earlier attempts to mediate. There was a heavy, complicated weight to her voice, as if she'd only just begun to grasp the full truth of everything. Your father's gone through the legal breakdown your lawyer sent over, and so has Jia Hongmei. They've been screaming at each other non-stop ever since. What are they fighting about? Jia claims she never knew about the staff housing demolition money, that your dad handled the whole scheme alone. He swears the original idea was hers. They've been hurling blame back and forth all night. Last night he smashed a teacup in rage, and this morning she packed her bags and announced she's moving back to her birth family's home. Then what? Jianing clung to her, begging her not to leave. Now the whole household sits silent in the living room, no one daring to speak to one another. My aunt sighed heavily. To be honest, I knew your mother mentioned that staff apartment years ago, but I trusted your father's word that he'd sorted all inheritance matters fairly once you came of age. It turns out I failed both your mother and you. Aunt, none of this falls on you. But how are we supposed to come up with over 2 million all at once, she pressed. Your dad only draws a 6,000 yuan monthly pension, every cent is saved over decades went toward Jianing's wedding flat. That's not a problem I'm obligated to solve. Gee. I've given them a 15-day window to draft a repayment proposal. If no viable plan lands before the deadline, I will file formal civil litigation. This is both Fang's legal advice and my own final decision. Would you really see your own father? If he refuses to return assets legally mine, yes. A long stretch of silence hung over the line. At last, she spoke softly. No matter what happens, I stand firmly on your side. Your mother's property rightfully belongs to you. Thank you, Aunt. I ended the call, and the 15-day countdown officially began. On day 3 of the waiting period, Zhao Hongmei dialed my number, and I answered. Gee, her voice rolled from hours of crying. I wanted to talk this over with you. Speak your mind. We truly cannot scrape together 2.27 million yuan overnight. But we can list Jianing's Junlan Mansion wedding apartment for sale. It's valued at roughly 3 million on the current market. We can use the proceeds to pay you back, but we need time to close the real estate transaction. Does Jianing agree to sell her home? I'm still working to convince her, she replied quietly. Give us 1 month's grace, and we'll hand over every cent owed by then. I thought it over briefly. I'll accept a 1-month extension, on 3 non-negotiable conditions. Name them. First, we sign a formal legal agreement drafted by attorney Fang. Second, the contract will clearly state the repayment deadline and financial penalties for missed installments. Third, they must fully cooperate with the handwriting authentication for the 2005 inheritance notarization. No attempts to stall or tamper with official court procedures will be tolerated. Several seconds of silence passed before she agreed. Have Fang draw up the paperwork, then. Gee, her tone softened abruptly. I know I haven't treated you well all these years. Your mother was a kind woman, and what's hers should be yours by right. I won't fight you over the money anymore, just don't hold Jianing accountable for choices she knew nothing about. I offered no reply to her plea for mercy. We'll discuss this further once the contract is finalized. I hung up. Chapter 21. The day we signed the settlement agreement fell on a Saturday, in a quiet Chengdu tea house private booth split down the middle by a long wooden table. Fang Mingyuan sat beside me on one side, across the table sat my father, Zhao Hongmei, Jianing, and Meng Haoqian. Zhao Hongmei's brother Zhao Jun did not show his face this time. Fang laid 3 identical copies of the contract flat on the table, every clause spelled out with zero room for ambiguity. Lin Jianhua acknowledges full liability to repay the combined 2.27 million yuan owed to Lin Ji, consisting of the 1.1 million staff housing demolition payout plus the 1.17 million share from the original 3-bedroom home's compensation. Full lump sum repayment must be transferred to Lin Ji's designated bank account within 30 calendar days of signing. Should payment fail to arrive on schedule, Lin Ji reserves full rights to initiate civil litigation, with all court fees and legal counsel charges borne solely by the defendants. Both parties agree to waive all future claims against one another upon full settlement, with no residual disputes remaining over the inheritance matter. My father stared at the printed pages for a long time before picking up a pen to sign his name. Zhao Hongmei's hand shook violently as she scrawled her signature beneath his. Jianing held no legal standing to sign the contract, so she sat silent the entire time, her expression unreadable. Once all signatures were finalized, Fang collected the original documents for safekeeping. As I turned to leave the booth, my father called out to stop me. I paused in the doorway. If your mother was still alive, none of this would have come to pass. I met his weary gaze evenly. None of this would have happened if he'd honored her final wishes after she passed away. He fell silent, unable to retort. Fang and I exited the tea house together into bright midday sunlight. Will they follow through on the repayment deadline? Fang asked as we walked toward the street crossing. Most likely, selling Jianing's apartment will net them over 3 million, enough to cover the full debt with leftover funds to spare. The only variable is whether Jianing will consent to list the property. And if they default entirely? We moved forward with the lawsuit per the contract terms. We parted ways at the road intersection, and my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar Shenzhen area code. I picked up. Lin Ji? This is Song Ying from Xinqi Media. We received an anonymous tip alleging you leverage your senior corporate position to coerce your blood relatives for massive personal payouts over a family property dispute. Would you care to issue an official statement for our coverage? I halted mid-step. Who submitted this tip? We cannot disclose our source's identity, per our outlet's privacy protocols. You may relay this message to whoever provided the tip. I possess a complete, irrefutable chain of legal evidence. If any unsubstantiated piece is published regarding my personal affairs, my attorney will immediately send formal cease and desist correspondence to your media firm. I ended the call. Clutching my phone tight in my palm on the Chengdu sidewalk, I realized someone had already begun launching behind-the-scenes retaliation against me. Chapter 22. That evening upon returning to Shenzhen, I relate the media harassment incident to Feng Mingyuan. I suspect either Zhao Hongmei or Meng Haotian orchestrated this smear campaign, I told him. Zhao tends to feign surrender while plotting underhanded retaliation. Meng Haotian's motive is even clearer, given his father's stake in the acquisition target my firm is auditing. How should we respond? We hold our ground for now. If fabricated articles go live, we deploy legal action at once. Also look into Xinqi Media's corporate credentials, determine if they operate as legitimate news or a clickbait ghostwriting agency taking paid hit jobs. Feng agreed to launch a background check and hung up. The next morning I attended regular work meetings. At lunch, my deputy Qin Yang pulled out her phone and slid a screenshot across the table to me, lowering her voice. A gossip finance group shared an anonymous post targeting you this morning. It never names you outright, but every detail lines up with our firm's senior female investment director embroiled in a family inheritance conflict, implied to exploit corporate confidential information against Qin for financial gain. I set my chopsticks down. Forward that screenshot to me. She sent the image over immediately. The post was carefully crafted, vague enough to avoid outright defamation yet laced with subtle hints that anyone familiar with my life would instantly recognize me as the subject. The reference to a business leverage secret only Meng Haotian could have planted, as he alone knew his father held stock in the target acquisition company under review at my team's committee. He'd miscalculated on two critical fronts. First, I'd recused myself from the audit process the moment I uncovered the conflict of interest. Second, I had never threatened to weaponize the acquisition against his family in any capacity. I headed straight to the compliance director's office that afternoon to fully document the conflict of interest and anonymous harassment plot. After laying out the full timeline of events, the compliance chief nodded gravely. You acted appropriately by self-disclosing this matter ahead of any external scandal. Effective immediately, you are removed from all work streams tied to that acquisition project to eliminate any perceived bias. Our legal team will monitor the social media posts for potential defamation violations. I left the compliance office and lingered in the corridor, processing Meng Haotian's clumsy attempt to sabotage my professional reputation. He'd picked the wrong fight. Chapter 23. That night I sent a direct WeChat message to Meng Haotian, you were behind that anonymous media post. No question mark needed. His reply arrived after a short delay, feigning ignorance. I don't know what post you are talking about. The reporter from Xinqi Media contacted me the day after your father approached me at the industry banquet. Only you knew about his shareholding in the target firm, the detail the hit piece weaponized against me to frame workplace misconduct. Meng Haotian, your scheme backfires far worse than you realize. 5 minutes passed before he sent a flimsy denial, claiming he worked an ordinary blue-collar job with no understanding of corporate MA. I opted not to engage further and closed the chat window. The following day Feng shared his investigative findings regarding Xinqi Media. The entity was not a licensed news outlet, merely a self-published digital marketing studio accepting cash for viral hit articles. Payment records traced back to an individual with the surname Meng. Shall we pursue legal action now? Feng asked. Hold off for the moment. If they repay the full 2.27 million yuan by the 1-month deadline, we drop the defamation investigation. If they default, this evidence becomes additional leverage in court. He chuckled at my measured restraint. You've grown remarkably patient over these months. I've learned the value of calculated waiting, I replied. Days ticked by, and on the 23rd day of the repayment grace period, Jennings sent a brief, neutral message. I've listed the Jinlan Mansion apartment with a realtor. The agent estimates a 2-week closing timeline. I'll transfer the full sum to you the second the sale funds hit my account. I typed a single word in response, understood. On day 26, the realtor confirmed a buyer had signed the purchase contract. On day 28, the full sale proceeds landed in Jennings' bank account. At 10:11 a.m. on the 29th day, a single bank transfer of exactly 2.27 million yuan posted to my account, the remitter listed as Lin Jianhua. I stood by the office floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Shenzhen Bay, staring at the glinting sunlight scattered across the bay's water as the settlement notification lingered on my phone screen. The assets my mother had legally left to me were finally returned, 20 years late, but fully recovered at last. Chapter 24. The evening the full transfer cleared, Jennings called me, her tone calm and stripped of prior hysterics or manipulation. The money's reached your account, hasn't it? It has. My husband and I have moved out of Jinlan Mansion. We're temporarily staying with my mother Zhao Hongmei for the time being. I offered no verbal reaction. I don't hold any resentment toward you anymore, she continued softly. I've spent weeks processing everything. The funds that bought my wedding flat never rightfully belonged to our family, and I lived off stolen inheritance for years without a clue. I'm relieved to settle the debt at last. There's one more detail you ought to know, she went on after a beat of quiet. Meng Haotian paid that media studio to publish the smear piece targeting me behind my back. We fought viciously once I uncovered what he'd done. He acted out of panic over his father's acquisition stake, fearing you'd sabotage their family's financial prospects. He's foolish, not malicious at heart. I hold the defamation evidence archived, but I will not press charges provided no further retaliation occurs from your household, I stated flatly. One chance is all I'll grant. I've spoken firmly to him to ensure no repeat incidents, she assured me. I ended the call without elaborating further. After the funds settled into my personal account, I rented a smaller 120 square meter Seaview apartment in Nanshan district to replace the Qianhai flat I'd sold months prior. I placed my mother's locked metal document box atop the new bookshelf, storing her handwritten asset statement, witness letters, and housing receipts securely inside. Feng's handwriting authentication report also arrived that month, officially ruling the 2005 minor inheritance waiver signature a forgery by an unknown third party. I opted to hold the notary revocation paperwork in reserve as a future contingency rather than file immediately. Would you like to formally void the invalid notarization now? Feng asked in a follow-up call. Not yet. We retain this document as leverage should they attempt to renege on our settlement down the line. He laughed, commenting my sharp strategic mindset aligned perfectly with my investment career expertise. Chapter 25. A full month after the repayment cleared, I attended a high-end commercial industry forum hosted in Chengdu, focused on emerging young capital leaders. Zhao Hongmei's brother Zhao Jun served as deputy general manager of the urban renewal consulting firm co-sponsoring the event, which explained my impulse to accept the speaking invitation. On the day of the forum, 300 industry executives and local government officials filled the venue's auditorium. Backstage reviewing the guest roster before my keynote, I spotted Zhao Hongmei's name marked as a special invited attendee. When my 20-minute presentation concluded covering 3 years of successful consumer sector investment exits, dozens of business owners swarmed the stage to exchange business cards and schedule collaboration talks. Pushing through the crowd to exit the auditorium, I spotted Zhao Hongmei lingering in the corridor, her dark red formal coat neatly pressed, hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her expression wavered between forced composure and quiet resentment as our eyes met. I paused briefly to acknowledge her. Aunt Zhao. Gee, her voice cracked faintly, you've truly accomplished extraordinary things for yourself. Thank you. I've replayed all these disputes in my head countless times, she murmured. I can't help but wonder, if I'd never interfered with your father and mother's estate, would you still have reached this level of success regardless? That question bears no connection to you or your choices, I replied plainly. Every milestone I've hit stems solely from my own hard work and career sacrifices. Her face paled at my unyielding candor. I didn't come here to pick a fight, she rushed to add. I simply wanted to witness your speech. I've seen it now. I turned to walk away, Zhao Jun darting after me to call my name, but I ignored his attempt to engage. I share no blood ties with your family, I tossed over my shoulder without glancing back. His footsteps halted instantly behind me. My phone buzzed with a message from Qin Yan, my deputy back in Shenzhen. Your forum keynote footage blew up online, over 1,000 shares in 10 minutes, multiple finance outlets reposting the talk under the headline of Shenzhen's youngest private equity partner. Let the content circulate freely, I replied, hailing a taxi bound for the airport. Mid-transit, another text arrived from Jenning. I saw your forum speech shared on my social feed. Aunt Zhao attended too, didn't she? I sent a single character in response, yes. She offered no further commentary afterward. Chapter 26. The forum footage spread far faster than I anticipated, picked up by dozens of mainstream financial media platforms within 72 hours, publicizing my professional resume and newly elevated partner title to the entire domestic investment industry. Invitations flooded my inbox from local chamber of commerce leaders and regional enterprise owners seeking private consultation opportunities. I declined the majority of generic meeting requests, only scheduling formal evaluations for 2 consumer brand projects with genuine viable growth potential. An unexpected call arrived for days post-forum from Meng Desheng, Meng Haoqian's father. His tone shifted drastically from the arrogant cordiality he'd used at the banquet encounter, dripping with desperate calculation instead. Gee, I need to ask a favor of you regarding that consumer goods acquisition our firm's committee is reviewing. Uncle Meng, I formally recused myself from the audit due to our family conflict creating a clear conflict of interest. Direct all inquiries to the acquisition lead instead of reaching out to me for personal favors. I know you carry immense influence within the fund's leadership team, though, he pressed. I never sway investment decisions to accommodate personal familial connections, I cut him off firmly. He fell silent for several seconds before forcing a hollow pleasantry to end the call. That evening I relayed the conversation to Feng Mingyuan, who confirmed the anonymous media hits payment trail led directly to Meng Haoqian's personal bank account. We preserved all transaction screenshots as archived evidence but agreed to hold off on litigation provided no further harassment ensued. Months slipped by, and one quiet evening my paternal aunt reached out to relay news of my father's marital strife with Zhao Hongmei, plus his wish to pen a handwritten letter to me to apologize for his past mistakes. I consented to receive the correspondence when she offered to mail it over. Chapter 27. A week later a brown craft envelope arrived via courier, holding a crumpled sheet of paper covered in my father's shaky, elementary-style handwriting. Dear G. Zhao Hongmei and I have discussed filing for divorce recently. I haven't given her a definitive answer yet. These past months I've rehashed every choice I made after your mother's passing, and your aunt shared a copy of Su Yunqia's handwritten asset statement with me. Everything she wrote holds true. I was far too easily swayed by others and failed to uphold the promises she left for you. The monetary settlement is complete, but no sum can erase the years of neglect I subjected you to. I don't know how to make amends, and I suspect repair is impossible at this stage. No need to reply to this letter. Focus on your own life and career. Dad? I read the letter twice, folded it neatly, and typed a concise text to my father afterward. I've received your letter. Take care of your health. He responded with a single one-character reply, okay. The exchange marked the quiet end of decades of fractured familial obligation on my end. That weekend King Yan invited me out for dinner to ask about my personal and professional outlook. "I'm stable, all things considered," I told her over steaming bowls of Sichuan noodles. "What's next for you professionally and personally?" "Next fiscal year I plan to launch a new investment fund focused on domestic consumer brands expanding overseas. As for my private life, I'm content living alone with no rush to build a new family unit." She studied me closely for a moment before commenting on my noticeable shift in demeanor. "You carry a quiet groundedness you never possessed before." "It's no longer a manufactured shield of emotional detachment," I explained. "I'm genuinely at peace with where I stand in life now." That night I retrieved my mother's faded youth photograph from the metal storage box, placing it in a new polished frame atop my bookshelf. I spoke softly to the portrait beneath the glow of my desk lamp. I fulfilled every last wish she left behind for me. Outside the window, Shenzhen's endless stretch of neon city lights glowed across the bay. Chapter 28. 1 month after recovering my inheritance funds, I was formally named a founding partner of Dinghe Capital, overseeing a 6.8 billion yuan asset management portfolio, making me the youngest partner in the firm's history. Industry-wide internal memos and finance social media groups circulated the promotion announcement by 10 a.m. the following workday, sparking a flood of congratulatory messages from colleagues, former classmates, and long-term clients alike. At 5:30 p.m. that same day, Jennings sent a brief congratulatory text without additional commentary. Later that evening my father called to offer muted well wishes for my promotion, his voice thin and hesitant over the line. We exchanged minimal pleasantries before ending the call, no lingering warmth between us after years of betrayal and manipulation. The distance separating us had solidified into an uncrossable divide I no longer sought to bridge. The next day Meng Haojian submitted a formal written apology letter via Fang Ming's professional email, admitting he paid the media studio to publish defamatory anonymous content and requesting a waiver of legal action. I instructed Fang to accept the signed, fingerprinted apology document and archive it as evidence, electing not to file a civil defamation lawsuit on the condition of zero future retaliation attempts. I never exchanged a single direct message with Meng Haojian following the settlement of that incident. Chapter 29. 6 months after resolving the inheritance dispute, I received an unexpected invitation to return to Chengdu as a keynote speaker for a local high-end commercial summit centered on emerging private equity talent. Upon reviewing the co-organizer roster, I spotted Zhao Zhang's name as deputy GM of the urban renewal consulting firm hosting the event and resolved to accept the speaking slot. During the summit's afternoon networking reception, Meng Dixing and Meng Haojian appeared alongside the target acquisition firm CEO, mingling with industry elites. They caught sight of me across the venue and crossed the floor to exchange awkward pleasantries. Our firm's founding chairman Lu Shen intercepted their conversation mid-handshake to escort me into the private VIP lounge for a confidential discussion, revealing I had been selected as the sole new partner candidate slated for official year-end promotion. Meng Dixing and Haojian watched us walk away, stunned by my direct access to the firm's highest executive leadership. When the internal promotion notice circulated publicly the following Monday, my inbox and social media accounts were inundated with industry congratulations. My father reached out once more to offer hollow praise, though our conversation remained brief and emotionally distant. All toxic family ties had fully unraveled, leaving me free to prioritize my career and independent life without the weight of endless familial exploitation hanging over my shoulders. Chapter 30. 1 year after the court and settlement proceedings finalized, I sat alone in my Nanshan Seaview Apartments floor-to-ceiling window lounge, scanning my firm's annual performance summary report resting atop the coffee table. My consumer investment fund's annual return ranked second company-wide, and the year-end bonus deposit notification glowed faintly on my phone screen. The figures were meaningful not for material wealth alone, but as tangible proof every achievement I'd earned stemmed from my own unassisted grit and sacrifice. My mother's rusted metal document box remained prominently displayed on the highest shelf of my bookcase, housing her handwritten asset declaration, housing receipts, and old personal letters preserved for 20 years. Fang Mingyuan forwarded official notice the prior week that the 2005 forged inheritance notarization had been formally voided by the District Notary Bureau after forensic handwriting analysis confirmed the fake signature. We held the voidance certification in reserve for any potential future conflicts with my father's household. My paternal aunt mailed my father's handwritten apology letter months prior, and I'd responded with only a short text acknowledging receipt, no attempts at reconciliation offered. I'd learned to accept permanent rifts as a natural consequence of repeated betrayal rather than chase broken familial bonds for the sake of superficial harmony. That evening I gazed out at the Shenzhen Bay sunset sinking beneath the city skyline, a calm quiet settling over my life I'd never once experienced during decades of catering to my father and stepfamily's endless demands. I'd recovered my mother's stolen legacy, escaped a lifetime of one-sided familial sacrifice, and built a thriving independent career on my own merits. No longer would I be reduced to a disposable tool for others' financial gain and emotional convenience. I was finally free to live solely for myself.